There is a house in Arkansas that does not belong in the story we tell ourselves about American success. It sits on a quiet street in Bentonville, a low-slung, mid-century structure designed by a student of Frank Lloyd Wright, with walls of windows that let the Ozark landscape spill inside. For decades, it was home to the richest man in America, a man whose personal fortune exceeded the combined wealth of entire nations. Yet from the outside, you would never know. No gates, no guards, no marble columns or gold fixtures, just a comfortable family home that could belong to a doctor or a successful accountant. This is where Sam Walton raised his children. This is where he lived while building Walmart into the largest retail empire in human history. And this is where a dynasty was born that would accumulate more wealth than the bottom 40% of all Americans combined, while leaving behind a legacy so complicated, so stained with tragedy and controversy, that it calls into question everything we think we know about success, inheritance, and the true cost of building an empire on the backs of the working poor. The Walton family fortune now stands at approximately $440 billion. To put that in perspective, if you earned $100,000 every single day since the birth of Christ, you still would not have accumulated what the Waltons possess today. Their wealth generates roughly $300 million in investment returns every week. While you watch this video, their fortune will grow by several $1,000,000. They will not lift a finger. They will not make a single decision. The money will simply appear, conjured by the mathematical inevitability of compound returns operating on an almost incomprehensible base of capital. This is the story of how that fortune was built. Not the sanitized version you will find in business textbooks, where Sam Walton is portrayed as a folksy genius who democratized consumption and brought prosperity to rural America. But the deeper, stranger, more troubling story of what happens when a single family accumulates more wealth than most nations, when the invisible hand of the market becomes very literally the hand of a few individuals, and when the American dream curdles into something that looks less like opportunity and more like feudalism with better marketing. If you value investigations into American economic power, the invisible structures that shape millions of lives, and the real story behind the brands we encounter every day, please like this video and subscribe. Your support makes these detailed explorations possible. Now, let us begin at the beginning, with a boy in Oklahoma who learned about money the hardest way possible. 1. The Education of Samuel Walton, How Poverty Creates Billionaires. March 29, 1918. Kingfisher, Oklahoma. A farming community where the soil was hard and the living harder. Samuel Moore Walton entered the world in circumstances that would have crushed most people. His father, Thomas Gibson Walton, was failing as a farmer. Not for lack of effort. The Oklahoma dirt simply refused to cooperate. Within a few years, Thomas gave up the fight and moved the family to Missouri, taking a job as a mortgage agent during what would become the Great Depression. Here is what shaped Sam Walton, what formed the psychology that would later build Walmart, riding beside his father through the back roads of Depression-era Missouri, watching Thomas deliver foreclosure notices to families who could not pay. Sam was perhaps 7 or 8 years old enough to understand what was happening. Families weeping as they learned their land, their homes, everything they had built was being taken. The government and the banks were not coming to save them. There was no safety net. You either made it or you did not. This was Sam's first education in economics. not from textbooks. From watching the raw mechanics of capitalism separate winners from losers. Some families survived the Depression, others did not. The difference often came down to nothing more than luck, timing, or a slight advantage in resources that compounded over time into the difference between keeping your farm and losing everything. Sam learned. Boy, did he learn. By age 7, he was working, milking the family cow, and his mother Nancy would bottle the surplus. Then Sam would load the bottles onto his bicycle and deliver them to neighbors who could still afford to pay. A nickel here, a dime there, money that might mean the difference between his family eating or going hungry. The milk routes were just the beginning. Sam took on a newspaper route so extensive he had to hire other boys to help him cover the territory. He sold magazine subscriptions door to door, developing the patter and persistence that would later make him a legendary salesman. He raised rabbits and pigeons, selling them for whatever the market would bear. By the time he reached high school, he was earning between $4,000 and $5,000 annually. In Depression-era dollars, a staggering sum for a teenager. His classmates at Hickman High School in Columbia, Missouri, voted him most versatile boy. He was student body president, quarterback of the football team. He became the youngest Eagle Scout in Missouri history, while still in 8th grade in Shelbina. Sam Walton was not just working, he was winning. At everything. Always. What drives a person like that? Sam would later claim it was simply about security, about never wanting to experience the poverty he had witnessed as a child. But there was something else, something deeper, an almost pathological need to win, to dominate, to prove himself superior through measurable achievement. Money was how you kept score, and Sam Walton intended to have the highest score. 2. The penny education, learning the game that would change everything. In 1940, Sam Walton graduated from the University of Missouri with a degree in economics. He had paid his own way through college with his various hustles and a job waiting tables in exchange for meals. 3 days after graduation, he walked into a J.C. Penney store in Des Moines, Iowa, and began his career in retail. The salary was $75 per month, barely enough to survive. But what Sam learned in those 18 months was worth more than any paycheck. J.C. Penney operated on principles laid out by its founder, James Cash Penney, in what was called the penny idea. Treat customers with respect. Sell quality goods at fair prices. Build trust in communities. Sam absorbed these lessons completely. But he also observed something else. The mechanics of retail. The markup on goods. How much suppliers would discount for bulk orders. How store layout influenced buying behavior. How price points could be manipulated to create the perception of value. Sam was not just learning to be a good employee. He was reverse engineering the entire retail business model, looking for weaknesses, for opportunities, for ways to do it better and cheaper. Then came World War II. Sam tried to enlist for combat, but was rejected due to a minor heart irregularity. Instead, he served in the Army Intelligence Corps, supervising security at aircraft plants and prisoner of war camps. Hardly glorious. But it taught him about logistics, about managing large operations, about the importance of systems and control. More importantly, the war brought him to Oklahoma, where he worked briefly at a DuPont munitions plant near Tulsa. There, in 1942, he met Helen Robson. She was the daughter of L.S. Robson, a successful banker and rancher. Helen was educated, with a degree in finance. She was smart, opinionated, and she came from money. Real money. the kind of money that opened doors. They married on Valentine's Day, 1943. Sam Walton, son of a failed farmer and mortgage agent, had just made the most important business decision of his life, though he probably did not think of it that way. He had married into capital, into connections, into the kind of social legitimacy that no amount of personal achievement could purchase. 3. The Newport years, building an empire, then losing it. In 1945, with the war over and $20,000 borrowed from his new father-in-law, plus $5,000 from his Army savings, Sam Walton purchased his first store, a Ben Franklin variety store franchise in Newport, Arkansas. He was 27 years old, married, with an infant son named Rob. Finally, he had his chance. Newport became Sam's laboratory. He was not content to simply run a franchise according to the manual. He wanted to understand everything. Why customers bought certain items and ignored others. How pricing affected volume. What happened if you stayed open later than competitors? What happened if you bought directly from manufacturers instead of through wholesalers? The landlord was a man named P.K. Holmes, and the store building sat on a 5-year lease. Sam threw himself into the work with manic intensity. He would arrive before dawn, rearranging displays. He would study competitors' stores, measuring their floor layouts, noting their prices, analyzing their weaknesses. He bought merchandise from the cheapest suppliers he could find, then passed the savings to customers, making his profit on volume rather than margin. The results were extraordinary. Within 3 years, Sam had taken a store doing $80,000 in annual sales and transformed it into one generating $225,000. It was the most profitable Ben Franklin franchise in a 6-state region. Sam Walton had proven he understood retail better than almost anyone. Then came the lesson that would shape everything that followed. When Sam's 5-year lease expired in 1950, P.K. Holmes refused to renew. Holmes had been watching Sam's success with great interest. Now he wanted the store for his own son. Sam had no recourse. His lease contained no renewal clause, a catastrophic oversight that would haunt him for years. Despite building something remarkable, despite his success, Sam Walton lost everything because he had failed to control one critical variable. He never made that mistake again. 4. The Bentonville bet, starting over in the middle of nowhere. Once again, with help from his father-in-law, Sam found a new location, Bentonville, Arkansas. Population, barely 3,000. A tiny town in the Ozark Mountains, far from anywhere that mattered. Most retailers would have seen Bentonville as exile, a career dead end. Sam saw opportunity. Small towns had been ignored by the major retail chains. Everyone wanted to operate in cities, in suburbs, where population density promised higher sales. But small towns had customers too. Customers who were underserved. Customers who had to drive hours to reach decent stores, or who simply paid whatever the local merchants charged because there was no alternative. On May 9th, 1950, Sam opened Walton's Five and Dime on the Bentonville Square, starting over at age 32. Armed now with hard-won experience and an iron determination never again to let circumstances destroy what he had built. The store succeeded. But one store was not enough. Throughout the 1950s, Sam scouted locations across Arkansas, Missouri, and Kansas, looking for small towns with the right characteristics. Population between 5,000 and 25,000. Far enough from major cities that the big chains would not bother competing. He flew his own plane, a small aircraft he had learned to pilot. surveying towns from the air, looking for potential sites. By 1962, Sam and his brother Bud owned or co-owned 16 Ben Franklin stores. They were successful, wealthy by small-town standards. But Sam was watching a revolution in retail that was about to change everything, and he intended to be at the center of it. 5. The discount revelation: how Walmart was born from a simple insight. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, a new kind of store was emerging: the discount retailer. Operations like Kmart and Target and Zayre were opening enormous stores in suburban locations, selling brand-name merchandise at prices that traditional department stores could not match. They accepted lower profit margins per item, but made up for it in volume. Huge volume. Sam understood the model immediately, but he also saw what the big discounters were missing. They were all chasing suburban markets, fighting over the same territory. Meanwhile, rural America, the thousands of small towns where most Americans still lived, was being completely ignored. Sam wanted to open a discount store in Bentonville. His Ben Franklin franchisor refused. They did not believe the model would work in small towns. So Sam cut ties with Ben Franklin and went independent. On July 2nd, 1962, Walmart Discount City opened in Rogers, Arkansas, 5 miles from Bentonville. The store was not beautiful. It had bare concrete floors, exposed pipes, merchandise piled on tables rather than elegantly displayed. But the prices were revolutionary. Sam was selling goods at margins so thin his competitors thought he was insane. They did not understand the game he was playing. Sam was not trying to maximize profit per transaction. He was trying to maximize transactions. If he could sell 10 items at a narrow margin instead of 1 item at a high margin, he would take the 10 sales every time. More importantly, he was building something else: customer loyalty. In small towns where options were limited, if you gave people the best prices, they remembered. They came back. They told their neighbors. Within 5 years, there were 18 Walmart stores scattered across Arkansas and Missouri, all in small towns, all operating on the same ruthless efficiency Sam had pioneered. He was building a distribution system that allowed him to move goods more efficiently than competitors. He was among the first retailers to use computer systems to track inventory and sales in real time. He was squeezing pennies out of every transaction, every shipment, every aspect of the operation, and he was getting very, very rich. 6. The architecture of dynasty. How Sam created a fortune that could never be taxed. In 1970, facing capital needs to fuel Walmart's expansion, Sam took the company public. The initial offering priced shares at $16.50. If you had purchased 100 shares in that offering, investing $1,650, and held them through all the subsequent splits and growth, by 2024, your investment would be worth approximately $15 million. Sam and his family retained the majority of shares. By 1982, when Forbes began publishing its list of wealthiest Americans, Sam Walton ranked among the richest people in the country. His personal fortune was estimated at between $700 million and $1 billion. But Sam had a problem that would only get worse as Walmart's value continued to grow. Estate taxes. When Sam died, federal law would allow the government to take up to 55% of his wealth. This meant that his children would have to sell massive amounts of Walmart stock to pay the tax bill, potentially losing control of the company their father had built. For someone as obsessed with control As Sam Walton, this was intolerable. So in the early 1980s, Sam executed one of the most consequential financial maneuvers in American history. He created a family partnership called Walton Enterprises, LLC. Then he transferred ownership of his Walmart shares into this partnership. The structure was ingenious. Sam and Helen each retained 10% of Walton Enterprises. Their 4 children each received 20%. The implications were profound. When Sam died, only his 10% share would be subject to estate taxes. The other 90% already owned by Helen, and the children would pass without taxation. It was perfectly legal. Wealthy families had been using similar structures for generations, but the Waltons took it to a level rarely seen. Sam was not just protecting millions, he was protecting billions. By the time Sam died in 1992, his share of Walmart was worth approximately $23 billion. His heirs paid estate taxes on only Sam's 10% stake, roughly $2.3 billion. The other 90%, worth more than $20 billion, transferred without the government taking a penny. The children of Sam Walton, through no effort of their own beyond being born into the right family, were now among the richest people on earth. 7. The House and the Children. Raising heirs in the shadow of empire. While Sam was building Walmart, he and Helen were raising their children in the Bentonville house designed by Ife Jones. Samuel Robson, called Rob, was born in 1944. John Thomas arrived in 1946. James Carr, known as Jim, followed in 1948. Alice Louise, the only daughter, was born in 1949. Sam tried to raise them with the same Depression-era values that had shaped him. They attended Bentonville public schools. They worked in Walmart stores as teenagers. Sam genuinely believed that inherited wealth was dangerous to character, that it would rob his children of the drive and purpose that had given his own life meaning. But how do you teach children about scarcity when they will never experience it? How do you instill a work ethic when they will inherit billions, regardless of what they do? Sam tried. He drove his beat-up Ford F-150 around town with hunting dogs in the back. He bought his clothes at Walmart. He ate breakfast at the same local diner as his employees. He refused to fly first class, even as his fortune climbed into the hundreds of millions. The children absorbed some of these lessons. Rob, the eldest, was groomed from childhood to take over the business. He worked his way up through Walmart's management structure, learning operations from the ground up. When Sam died, Rob would become chairman of the board, the position his father had held. John took a different path. After serving as a Green Beret medic in Vietnam, where he earned a Silver Star for pulling wounded soldiers from under enemy fire, John seemed restless. He worked as a crop duster in the 1970s, built boats in the 1980s, finally joined the Walmart board in 1992, more out of family obligation than genuine interest. Jim, quiet and analytical, gravitated toward finance. He became chairman of Arvest Bank, the family's banking operation, and eventually took charge of Walton Enterprises itself, managing the family's vast investments. Alice was the most independent. She worked briefly at Walmart as a buyer of children's clothing but hated it. The corporate culture, the relentless focus on cost-cutting, the utterly utilitarian view of everything. She became an investment banker, founding a firm called Llama Company. But her true passion was art, a love inherited from her mother Helen, who had taught her to paint watercolors on childhood camping trips. Each child would respond differently to the burden of extreme wealth. Rob would shoulder it dutifully. Jim would manage it analytically. John would escape it through adventure until adventure killed him. And Alice would be nearly destroyed by it, her struggles playing out in public in ways that exposed the dark side of dynastic wealth. 8. The wage model. How Sam built an empire on poverty. To understand the Walton fortune, you must understand how it was actually generated. Not through innovation alone, though Sam was certainly innovative. Not through superior service, though Walmart's logistics were revolutionary. The Walton fortune was built on a very simple principle: pay workers as little as legally possible, and sometimes less than that. Sam himself was remarkably candid about this. In a famous quote that is public, relations team later tried to bury, Sam said, "I pay low wages. I can take advantage of that. We're going to be successful, but the basis is a very low wage, low benefit model of employment." This was not just rhetoric. It was policy. In the 1960s, when President John F. Kennedy extended minimum wage protections to retail workers, Sam was furious. He had been hiring displaced farm workers for as little as 50 cents an hour. Now the federal government was mandating he pay at least $1.15. His response was to divide his stores into separate legal entities, each structured to fall below the revenue threshold that triggered minimum wage requirements. It was legal evasion, technically compliant with the law, completely contrary to its spirit. When a federal court ordered him to issue back pay to workers in several Arkansas towns, including double-time penalties for wages they had been denied, Sam reportedly told a meeting of employees that he would fire anyone who cashed their check. His lawyers eventually convinced him this was insane, and the checks were honored. But the incident revealed something essential about Sam Walton. When his profits were threatened, the folksy charm disappeared. What remained was cold calculation. By the 1990s, Walmart had become the largest private employer in America, and its wage model was devastating working-class communities. Studies showed that when Walmart entered a region, overall wages fell. Competitors who paid better were driven out of business. Unions, which might have negotiated better terms, were crushed through aggressive anti-union campaigns that bordered on illegal. The average Walmart associate in 2001 earned $8.23 per hour, roughly $14,000 per year, below the federal poverty line for a family of 3. Many workers qualified for food stamps, Medicaid, and other government assistance programs. This meant that American taxpayers were effectively subsidizing Walmart's profits. The company paid poverty wages, and the government made up the difference. Estimates suggested this hidden subsidy cost taxpayers more than $6 billion annually. Meanwhile, the Walton family fortune grew, and grew, and grew. By 2001, the combined net worth of Sam's widow Helen and their 4 children exceeded $100 billion, more than the combined wealth of Bill Gates and Warren Buffett at the time. The 6 Waltons who sat on the Forbes 400 list had more wealth than the bottom 40% of Americans combined. 9. The death of the founder, April 1992. In 1982, Sam Walton was diagnosed with hairy cell leukemia, a rare blood cancer. He was treated with a new drug called interferon, and the disease went into remission. Sam kept working, kept flying his plane to store visits, kept pushing his executives to find new efficiencies. But in 1990, the cancer returned in a new form. Multiple myeloma, a malignancy of the bone marrow that was, in 1990, essentially incurable. Sam underwent treatment at MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston. The treatments bought him time, but could not save him. Even as his body failed, Sam refused to stop. He reviewed sales reports from his hospital bed. He insisted on visiting stores, though he had to use a wheelchair. His son Rob later recalled that Sam was studying financial data just days before he died, still looking for ways to improve margins, to cut costs, to win. On March 17, 1992, President George H.W. Bush traveled to Bentonville to present Sam with the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor. Sam was too weak to stand, but he insisted on leading his employees in the Walmart cheer one final time. The photograph from that day shows a man who is clearly dying but refusing to surrender. 3 weeks later, on April 5, 1992, 1 week after his 74th birthday, Samuel Moore Walton died at University Hospital in Little Rock. The news was transmitted by satellite to all 1,160 Walmart stores worldwide. Employees wept. Even critics who despised his labor practices acknowledged that something extraordinary had passed from the American scene. Sam was buried in the Bentonville Cemetery. His headstone is simple, no grander than his neighbors, just as he wanted. He had spent his life resisting the trappings of wealth, and he saw no reason to change in death. What he left behind was a fortune worth approximately $23 billion and a business empire that employed more than 370,000 people. His children inherited both. The fortune would continue to grow. The empire would continue to expand. But something essential was lost when Sam died. Whatever sense of purpose had driven him, whatever psychological wound had fueled his relentless drive, it could not be transmitted through trust documents or stock transfers. His children were billionaires, but they were not Sam Walton. 10. The curse of Alice Walton. When wealth meets the law. Of the 4 Walton children, Alice has suffered the most public troubles. Whether this reflects actual reality or simply the fact that her problems happened where cameras could see them is debatable. But the pattern is undeniable. Thanksgiving, 1983. The Walton family had gathered at a resort near Acapulco, Mexico. Alice, then 34, decided to take a drive. She rented a Jeep and set out along the coastal roads. What happened next is unclear. The vehicle plunged into a ravine. When rescuers reached her, both legs were shattered. Mexican doctors recommended amputation. Within hours, Alice was airlifted to the University of Arkansas Medical Sciences Hospital in Little Rock. American surgeons fought to save her legs. They succeeded, but barely. Alice would undergo more than 24 surgeries over the following months. One leg healed reasonably well. The other remained shorter, permanently damaged, a source of chronic pain. She would walk with a slight limp for the rest of her life. The accident was the first public sign that the Walton children's lives would not be as charmed as their bank accounts suggested. It would not be the last. April 4th, 1989. A foggy morning in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Alice was driving her Porsche along a country road. Visibility was poor. A woman named Oleta Hardin stepped into the road ahead. She was 50 years old, a cannery worker, someone whose annual salary would not cover the cost of Alice's car. The impact killed Oleta Hardin instantly. What happened next has become one of the most controversial episodes in Walton family history. Despite reports that Alice had been speeding, despite the fact that she had received a speeding ticket just the previous year on the same road, no charges were ever filed. The incident was recorded as a no-fault accident. Tragic, but unavoidable. Oleta Hardin's family received no public acknowledgement from the Waltons. No apology, no explanation. The woman who had worked her entire life, probably shopping at Walmart because she could not afford anywhere else, was simply erased. And Alice Walton drove away without consequence. To critics, the case exemplified everything wrong with American justice. A billionaire kills a working-class woman and faces no consequences. If the situation had been reversed, if Oleta Hardin had struck and killed Alice Walton, does anyone believe she would have walked away without charges? The question answers itself. But Alice's troubles were just beginning. 11. The pattern emerges. 3 arrests, 0 convictions, October 11th, 1998. Springdale, Arkansas. Alice was driving her SUV through town when she crashed into a gas meter and telephone booth. When police arrived, they found her intoxicated. Her blood alcohol level measured 0.16. The legal limit was 0.10. She was more than 50% over the limit. According to police reports, Alice asked the arresting officers, "Do you know who I am? Do you know my last name?" It was a rhetorical question. Everyone in Arkansas knew the Walton name. The family employed tens of thousands. Their foundation donated millions to local causes. Their banks held mortgages on countless homes. To cross a Walton was to risk one's livelihood in ways both obvious and subtle. Alice's lawyers mounted an unusual defense. They argued that her erratic driving was caused not by alcohol, but by exhaustion from working too hard at the office. The Springdale judge was unconvinced. Alice was convicted of driving while intoxicated and fined $925. $925. Her net worth at the time was approximately $6.3 billion. The fine represented roughly 0.001% of her fortune, the equivalent of an ordinary person being fined less than a penny. 13 years later, it happened again. October 7, 2011, Alice's 62nd birthday. She had spent the evening celebrating with friends at a Fort Worth restaurant, then got behind the wheel of her SUV. Texas State Trooper Jeffrey Davis noticed the vehicle weaving between lanes on Interstate 20 near Weatherford. He pulled her over. According to Trooper Davis's report, Alice could not walk a straight line, could not touch her finger to her nose. She was visibly intoxicated. He arrested her and took her to Parker County Jail, where she was held overnight. Her mugshot, which should have appeared on the jail's public website within hours, mysteriously failed to post until a reporter called to inquire. The Parker County Sheriff claimed he was unaware of any problem with the website. What followed was a masterclass in how wealth makes legal problems disappear. Alice's lawyers produced medical letters explaining that her failed sobriety tests were caused by lingering balance problems from the 1983 Acapulco accident. The same injuries that had required dozens of surgeries 28 years earlier, they argued, made it impossible for her to walk a straight line even when sober. More critically, no blood alcohol test was ever conducted. Trooper Davis, for reasons never fully explained, had not administered a breathalyzer or drawn blood at the scene. Without chemical evidence, prosecutors had only the field sobriety tests. Tests that Alice's doctors claimed were meaningless given her physical condition. The case dragged on for 2 years. Then something remarkable happened. In March 2013, Trooper Jeffrey Davis, the arresting officer, was suspended from the Texas Department of Public Safety. Without his testimony, prosecutors argued, they could not proceed. In October 2013, the Parker County District Attorney's Office allowed the statute of limitations to expire. Alice Walton's DUI charge simply vanished. 3 weeks later, her lawyers successfully petitioned to have all records of the arrest expunged from county files. The richest woman in America had been arrested for drunk driving on her birthday, held overnight in jail, and recorded on video failing sobriety tests. And yet, she walked away without even a fine. The contrast with Oleta Hardin's fate could not be more stark. Hardin died on a foggy road and was forgotten. Alice crashed while intoxicated multiple times and walked away each time without consequence. This is what $440 billion buys. Not just mansions and art collections. Immunity from the law itself. 12. The death of John Walton, when adventure becomes tragedy. While Alice battled her demons, her brother John was trying to find meaning beyond the fortune he had inherited. After his decorated service in Vietnam, John had settled in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. He focused on philanthropy, particularly education reform. Through the Walton Family Foundation, he helped establish the Children's Scholarship Fund, providing low-income families with money to send their children to private schools. John was genuinely committed to this work. He visited the schools his foundation supported. He met with families. He believed deeply that education was the path out of poverty. There is a bitter irony here. The Walton fortune was built on paying poverty wages to workers who could not afford better education for their children. And John was using a fraction of that fortune to help a tiny number of those children escape, not to change the system, to rescue a few individuals from it. But John was also an adventurer. He built motorcycles by hand. He flew ultralight aircraft, experimental planes with small engines and fabric wings that looked more like motorized kites than proper aircraft. These machines are inherently dangerous. They lack the redundant systems and safety features of certified aircraft. A single mechanical failure can be fatal. On June 27, 2005, John climbed into his kit-built CGS Aviation Hawk Arrow at Jackson Hole Airport. He had personally modified the aircraft, removing its fabric skin and replacing components. Days earlier, he had made a hard landing in Nebraska that damaged the landing gear. He knew the plane had problems. He flew it anyway. Shortly after noon, the ultralight lifted off. Witnesses watched it rise briefly, then falter. It crashed within seconds of takeoff in Grand Teton National Park. John Walton died on impact. He was 58 years old. His personal fortune was estimated at $18 billion. The National Transportation Safety Board investigation found a loose flight control component that likely failed during takeoff. The manufacturer admitted they had never tested the aircraft in the configuration John was flying. In other words, John died because he was flying an experimental aircraft he had personally modified beyond any tested specifications after it had already demonstrated mechanical problems. Why? What drives a man worth $18 billion to risk his life in a homemade aircraft he knew was damaged? Perhaps it was the same impulse that drove him to volunteer for Special Forces, duty in Vietnam, a need to prove himself through physical risk, to demonstrate that he was not just a trust fund baby, but someone willing to face real danger. Or perhaps it was simpler. Perhaps John Walton was just bored. When you have everything, when every material desire can be satisfied instantly, the only thing left that provides a genuine thrill is risk itself. The possibility of loss. The one thing money cannot eliminate. John left behind his wife, Christy, and son Lucas. In a closely guarded secret, revealed years later through sealed court documents, John had structured his estate to leave half his fortune to charitable trusts and approximately one-third to Lucas, not to Christie. The marriage had apparently soured, though they remained together until his death. The details remain sealed. But even in death, even in tragedy, the Waltons ensured that money stayed within the family bloodline. 13. The Empire Under Siege. Walmart's labor reckoning. While Alice and John faced their personal tragedies, the company Sam built faced challenges of its own. Challenges that threatened to expose the true cost of the Walton fortune. From the moment Sam died, critics had been attacking Walmart's labor practices. Union organizers, locked out for decades by the company's aggressive anti-union tactics, found new allies among journalists, politicians, and advocacy groups. The numbers they assembled were damning. Studies showed that Walmart's average wages were significantly lower than those paid by other retailers. The average sales associate in 2005 earned approximately $8.50 per hour, roughly $17,600 per year. Competitors like Costco paid an average of $17 per hour, twice what Walmart paid. Yet Costco remained profitable, even thriving. This suggested that Walmart's low wages were not an economic necessity. They were a choice, a deliberate strategy to maximize profits by minimizing labor costs. And because Walmart was so large, because it dominated so many regional labor markets, this choice rippled outward. When Walmart entered a community, overall wages fell. Competitors who paid better were forced to cut wages or go out of business. Entire regional economies were reshaped around Walmart's poverty wage model. The hidden subsidy became a major political issue. Because Walmart's workers earned so little, many qualified for government assistance, food stamps, Medicaid, earned income tax credits. These programs were designed to help people in temporary difficulties, not to permanently subsidize the labor costs of the world's largest retailer. Yet that was exactly what was happening. A 2004 study by the House Committee on Education and the Workforce found that a single 200-employee Walmart store cost taxpayers approximately $420,000 per year in government assistance to its workers. Multiply that across Walmart's thousands of stores, and the total exceeded $6 billion annually. American taxpayers were, in effect, providing a massive hidden subsidy to the Walton family fortune. The Waltons' response to this criticism was largely silence. They continued living their private lives, managing their investments through Walton Enterprises, and letting Walmart's corporate communications team handle the controversy. When senators and activists demanded that the family pay a living wage, the Waltons simply did not engage. This silence infuriated critics. Here was a family worth hundreds of billions of dollars. A family whose wealth increased by roughly 10,000% between 1982 and 2005. And they refused even to acknowledge that their workers could not afford basic necessities. The contrast between the Waltons' wealth and their workers' poverty became a symbol of everything critics believed was broken about American capitalism. Protests erupted at Walmart stores across the country. Workers staged walkouts on Black Friday, the busiest shopping day of the year. Activists marched on Alice Walton's luxury apartment building on Park Avenue in Manhattan, demanding the family address wage inequality. 26 protesters were arrested after refusing to leave the street. The Waltons remained unmoved. Their fortune continued to grow. And somewhere in America, a single mother finished her Walmart shift and drove home wondering how she would pay rent. 14. Crystal Bridges. How Alice tried to buy redemption. If there was one area where Alice Walton seemed determined to reshape her legacy, it was art. Her passion had begun in childhood, nurtured by her mother Helen, who taught her to paint watercolors on camping trips. At age 10, Alice purchased her first artwork, a reproduction of Picasso's Blue Nude, for $2. As her fortune grew, Alice began acquiring serious pieces, American masters like Winslow Homer and Georgia O'Keeffe. In 2005, she shocked the art world by purchasing Asher Brown Duran's Kindred Spirits from the New York Public Library for $35 million. Critics accused her of stripping cultural treasures from public institutions. The fact that the painting was heading to Arkansas seemed to add insult to injury. What business did a Walmart heiress have owning museum-quality art? Alice had an answer. She would build her own museum, a world-class institution in Bentonville, Arkansas, that would rival anything in New York or Los Angeles. And admission would be free. Working-class families, the same people who shopped at Walmart, would be able to experience masterworks of American art without paying a penny. In November 2011, Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art opened to the public. Built into an Ozark ravine, designed by architect Moshe Safdie, the museum was stunning. Alice had assembled a collection worth more than $500 million from her personal holdings. Works by Stewart, Copley, Church, Homer, Hopper, Pollock, Rothko, Warhol. A comprehensive survey of American art from the colonial period to the present. And Alice kept her promise. Admission was free. Hundreds of thousands of visitors came in the first year. Many had never set foot in an art museum before. For Alice, Crystal Bridges represented something larger than art appreciation. It was redemption. Proof that the Walton fortune could create something beautiful, something valuable beyond mere accumulation of wealth. Critics remained skeptical. Building a museum is one thing. Paying workers a living wage is another. Crystal Bridges cost approximately $450 million to construct and stock. That money could have funded substantial wage increases for tens of thousands of Walmart workers. Instead, it bought art that would bear Alice Walton's name for generations. Vanity masquerading as philanthropy. But visit Crystal Bridges, and you will see something that complicates this cynical view. You will see families who have driven hours to experience art they could never otherwise access. Children standing in front of a Norman Rockwell, a Stuart Davis, a Jenny Holzer, completely absorbed. This is real. The educational value is undeniable. Perhaps both things are true. Crystal Bridges is both a genuine gift to the community and an attempt to launder a reputation stained by DUI arrests and labor exploitation. Alice Walton is both an art patron who has created something of lasting value and the beneficiary of a system that impoverishes millions while enriching a handful beyond any reasonable measure. People contain multitudes, even billionaires. 15. The dynasty continues. The third generation rises. Sam Walton has been dead for 32 years. His widow Helen died in 2007 at age 87. Of the 4 children, 3 survive. Rob is 79. Jim is 75. Alice is 74. They have a combined net worth exceeding $280 billion. The third generation is now rising to prominence. Lucas Walton, John's son, inherited his father's fortune at age 19. He is now 37 and worth approximately $11 billion. Unlike his father, Lucas has largely avoided the public eye, focusing on environmental philanthropy through the Builders Initiative. Stuart Walton, Jim's son, joined the Walmart board of directors, becoming the fourth generation to hold a governance role in the company. The dynasty Sam created shows no signs of fading. If anything, it is becoming more entrenched. The Walton fortune generates approximately $300 million per week in investment returns. Even if they spent $100 million per week, every week, their wealth would continue to grow. They could not spend it fast enough to diminish it. This is what happens when compound returns operate on a sufficiently large base of capital. Money generates more money with mathematical inevitability. Meanwhile, Walmart continues to dominate American retail. The company operates more than 4,600 stores in the United States and more than 10,500 worldwide. It employs approximately 2.1 million people, making it the largest private employer on Earth. Annual revenue exceeds $600 billion. The company Sam built in a small Arkansas town has become one of the most powerful economic forces in human history. And the family he raised controls it through their majority stake in Walton Enterprises, which holds approximately 50% of Walmart's outstanding shares. They do not run the company day to day. Professional managers handle operations, but major strategic decisions flow through the family. They have the power to veto any proposal, to fire any executive, to reshape the company's direction with a single vote. This is dynastic capitalism, not the entrepreneurial capitalism celebrated in business textbooks where individuals compete on merit and the market rewards innovation. This is something older, more feudal. A system where birth determines destiny and wealth concentrates across generations until a handful of families control resources that dwarf the holdings of entire nations. 16. The American aristocracy. What the Waltons represent. There is a house in Arkansas that tells a story about America. Not the story we tell ourselves in political speeches. Not the myth of equal opportunity and meritocracy. A different story. One about what happens when wealth compounds across generations. When political power flows from economic power. When the rules that govern ordinary people simply do not apply to those with sufficient resources. The Walton family fortune is not an aberration. It is the logical endpoint of a system designed to allow capital to accumulate without limit. When Sam Walton died in 1992, his estate should have been taxed at 55%. That was the law. Instead, through perfectly legal structures, his heirs paid taxes on less than 10% of the fortune. The rest transferred intact. This is not a conspiracy. It is policy. American tax law is written to favor dynastic wealth. Capital gains are taxed at lower rates than labor income. Estate taxes can be avoided through trusts and partnerships. Charitable foundations allow billionaires to maintain control of their wealth even as they claim to give it away. The Walton Family Foundation, for example, holds approximately $6.5 billion in assets. It makes substantial donations to education reform, environmental conservation, and arts institutions. This is genuine philanthropy that benefits real people. But it also serves another purpose. Foundation assets are not subject to estate taxes. They allow the Waltons to exercise enormous influence over public policy while reducing their taxable wealth. When Alice donated more than $400 million worth of art to Crystal Bridges, she received massive tax deductions while maintaining control of the collection through her role on the museum's board. This is how billionaire philanthropy works. You give away wealth that is not liquid anyway. You control how it is spent. You get tax benefits that allow you to retain even more wealth, and you receive public acclaim as a generous donor. Everyone wins, except the taxpayers who subsidize the tax breaks and the workers whose wages might have been higher if profits had been shared more equitably. The Waltons are not villains in some simplistic morality tale. They are products of a system that rewards exactly what they have done. Sam built a business that delivered value to customers. Low prices, convenient locations, wide selection. This is real. Millions of Americans benefit from shopping at Walmart. But the business was built on a model that impoverishes workers, destroys local competitors, and extracts wealth from communities while returning as little as possible. The fortune was transferred across generations through legal structures specifically designed to avoid taxation. The heirs wield political and economic power that no individuals in a democratic society should possess. And when they break the law, as Alice has repeatedly, they face no meaningful consequences. This is American aristocracy, not titled nobility, but something functionally equivalent, a class of people for whom the normal rules of society do not apply, who can kill without consequence, who can drive drunk without punishment, who can pay poverty wages while accumulating wealth that exceeds the GDP of nations, who can shape politics, education, and culture through their foundations and donations without any democratic accountability. The Walton story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. Is this the society we want? One where birth determines economic destiny? Where inherited wealth grants immunity from law? Where billionaires exercise more influence over public policy than elected officials? Where the fortune of 6 people exceeds the combined wealth of 130 million? 17. The curse revealed. What money cannot buy. There is a curse that haunts the Walton family. Not a supernatural curse from folklore, a material curse. The curse of having so much that nothing means anything. Alice Walton can buy any artwork she desires. She owns a collection worth more than $500 million. Does it bring her peace? She has been arrested multiple times for drunk driving. She killed a woman on a foggy road and faced no consequences. She walks with a limp from an accident in Mexico. Her life is marked by tragedy and struggle despite wealth that could purchase small nations. John Walton had $18 billion. It could not save him when his experimental aircraft failed after takeoff. It could not fill whatever void drove him to risk his life in a machine he knew was damaged. He died pursuing a thrill that money cannot provide. The validation of survival against genuine risk. Rob and Jim have avoided public scandal. They manage their billions with quiet competence. But what do their lives actually consist of? Managing investments, attending board meetings, making decisions that affect millions of workers they will never meet. Decisions driven by spreadsheets and quarterly earnings reports rather than human relationships. Is this a life, or merely an existence sustained by accumulated capital? The curse is not suffering. The Waltons do not suffer in any conventional sense. The curse is meaninglessness. When every material desire can be instantly satisfied, when consequence never follows action, when wealth grows automatically regardless of effort, what is left to give life purpose? Sam Walton had purpose. He was driven by demons born in the Depression, by memories of families losing everything, by a desperate need to prove himself, to win, to accumulate. These demons destroyed any possibility of normal relationships. Sam was absent for most of his children's lives, consumed by work. But at least his life had direction. He was building towards something. His heirs have inherited the fortune without the struggle. They have wealth beyond imagination, but no compelling purpose. Philanthropy fills some of the void. Alice has her museum. John had his education reform. Lucas has environmental conservation. But these are hobbies, funded by automatic returns on inherited capital. They are not the central organizing purpose of a life. The workers who stock Walmart shelves have purpose. They must earn their survival. Every shift matters. Every paycheck determines whether they can pay rent, buy food, keep the lights on. Their lives have stakes, consequences, the grinding purpose of necessity. The Waltons have freedom from necessity. This sounds like paradise. Perhaps it is hell. 18. The house still stands. The house in Bentonville still stands. It was donated to the Edward M. Kennedy Institute after Ted Kennedy's death in 2009, part of a complex arrangement involving the Walton Family Foundation. The Waltons no longer live there. They have moved on to estates in Texas, Wyoming, and Manhattan. But the house remains, a physical reminder of what was built in Arkansas. Visitors can see the Fay Jones architecture, the low-slung roofline, the walls of windows bringing the landscape inside, the modest scale that seems impossible for a house that once belonged to the richest family in America. This was where Sam ate dinner with his family on the rare occasions he was home, where Helen raised 4 children largely by herself, where a dynasty was born. A few miles away, on the Bentonville Square, the original Walton's 5 and dime is now a museum. Sam's old pickup truck is on display. Faded photographs show Sam in his later years, wearing his Walmart vest, leading employees in company cheers. The museum presents Sam as a folksy genius, a man of the people who never forgot his humble origins. This version is not entirely false. Sam genuinely did drive an old pickup. He did eat at local diners. He did resist the obvious trappings of wealth. But the museum does not mention the workers he underpaid. The federal court orders demanding back wages. His angry threats to fire employees who cash their settlement checks. The business model deliberately structured to pay poverty wages while accumulating dynastic wealth. Both versions are true. Sam Walton was a brilliant entrepreneur who revolutionized retail and brought lower prices to millions. Sam Walton was a ruthless capitalist who built his fortune on the backs of workers paid so little that taxpayers had to subsidize their survival. People contain contradictions. So do legacies. The Bentonville Cemetery is nearby. Sam's grave is marked by a simple headstone, indistinguishable from those of his neighbors. Helen lies beside him. John was buried here after his death in Wyoming. When Rob, Jim, and Alice eventually die, they will likely rest here as well, in the town Sam made famous. What will future generations make of the Waltons? Will they be remembered as titans of industry, as transformational figures who changed how Americans shop and live, or as robber barons who accumulated obscene wealth while impoverishing millions, or as tragic figures imprisoned by their own fortune, unable to find purpose or peace despite resources beyond imagination? Perhaps all three. History contains room for complexity. Conclusion: the real cost of everything. Sam Walton built Walmart on a simple principle: give customers the lowest possible prices by cutting costs everywhere else. Labor costs, supplier costs, overhead, benefits. Everything was subordinated to the drive for efficiency, for lower prices, for higher volume. It worked spectacularly. Walmart became the largest retailer in history. The Walton family became the richest in America. Customers saved billions of dollars on purchases they might not otherwise have been able to afford. This is real value, undeniable value. But there was a cost. There is always a cost. Workers paid poverty wages. Communities hollowed out as local businesses died. A hidden taxpayer subsidy of billions. A legal system that bends around wealth. A family cursed by having so much that nothing matters. Economists call these externalities, costs that are not reflected in the price of goods. When you buy something at Walmart for $5 instead of $7 elsewhere, you save $2. But the full cost of that product includes the government assistance required to keep the worker who stocked it alive. It includes the local business that closed because it could not compete. It includes the community that lost its economic diversity and became dependent on a single employer who pays poverty wages. Those costs are real. They are simply hidden, distributed across society rather than included in the price tag. Walmart's genius was figuring out how to externalize costs while capturing profits. And the Walton family's genius was figuring out how to structure their affairs so that the resulting wealth would compound across generations without being taxed away. This is not illegal. It is not even particularly unusual among the very wealthy. But it does raise the question, is this the system we want? One where individual decisions, perfectly rational at the micro level, produce outcomes at the macro level that impoverish communities and concentrate wealth to levels not seen since the Gilded Age. There are no easy answers. Walmart provides value. Low prices matter to poor and working class families. Jobs matter, even low-wage jobs. The Walton philanthropy does genuine good. Crystal Bridges is remarkable. The Children's Scholarship Fund helps real children. But it is possible to acknowledge these truths while also recognizing that something is profoundly broken about a system that produces the Walton fortune. $440 billion, more than the combined wealth of the bottom 40% of Americans. Wealth that grows automatically, regardless of effort, protected from taxation, insulated from consequences. The house in Arkansas tells this story. A modest home that belonged to the richest man in America. A man who resisted luxury, but could not resist accumulation. Who raised children in relative simplicity, but ensured they would inherit billions. Who built an empire on low wages and lower costs while preaching service to customers and communities. The Walton legacy is America's legacy. A story of innovation and exploitation, of opportunity and inequality, of wealth creation and wealth extraction, of individuals making rational choices within a system that produces irrational outcomes. We built this. Through our laws and our choices and our tolerance for extreme inequality. The Waltons simply played the game better than almost anyone else. The house still stands. The fortune still grows. And somewhere in America, a Walmart worker finishes her shift and wonders how she will pay rent this month. This is the cost of everything, the real price hidden behind the everyday low prices, the curse disguised as a blessing, the dynasty built on a foundation of externalized suffering. That is the tragic story of the Walton family estate,